When I left the orphanage, they said I inherited a sealed vault. What I built there changed everything. If you've ever felt like your story was written for you by someone else, like you were just a name on a form in a file cabinet, then I think you'll understand what comes next. So, if you're ready for a story about second chances and what it really means to inherit something, stick around. And maybe hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning of the journey, and I want to take you with me. The air on my 18th birthday tasted like institutional dust and stale freedom. For 10 years, I'd measured my life in the linoleum squares of the corridors at Northgate Youth Services. 240 squares from my room to the cafeteria, 87 to the director's office. On that Tuesday in October, it was 34 steps from the front door to the curb, and each one felt like walking off a cliff in slow motion. I carried a single black duffel bag containing everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback, a toothbrush, and a bundle of anxieties I didn't have room to pack but carried anyway. Ms. Albright, my caseworker for the last 4 years, stood beside me. She was a woman built of tired kindness and sensible shoes, her face a permanent landscape of compassionate worry. She'd been the closest thing to a stable adult in my life, which wasn't saying much. She checked her watch, then looked at the city bus wheezing its way toward us down the street. "Leo, are you sure about this? We can find you a spot in the transitional housing program. It's not much, but it's a roof. It's a start." I shook my head, my eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. A start to what? Another 2 years of checking in and checking out? Of being a file in a system? My voice was flatter than I intended. The feelings were there, fear mostly, but they were buried under a thick layer of numbness I'd cultivated as a survival mechanism. Being emotional at Northgate got you labeled at risk. Being quiet got you labeled resilient. I'd learned to be very resilient. She sighed, a small puff of steam in the cold autumn air. "I know it hasn't been easy, but the world out here, it's not any kinder." "I know," I said, and I did. I'd watched older kids age out, full of bravado, only to see them a year later on a street corner, their light extinguished. The bus hissed to a stop in front of us. This was it, the end of the line. Ms. Albright suddenly clutched my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait, there's one more thing. It's unusual. I was supposed to wait until we were at the office, but there's no time." She fumbled in her oversized tote bag, pulling out a thick manila envelope. It looked old, the papers softened with age, sealed with a brittle wax stamp I couldn't make out. My name was written on the front, in an elegant, looping script that felt like it belonged to another century. Leo Vance. "This came to the state's wardship office years ago," she explained, her voice low and hurried. "The instructions were very specific. It was to be held in trust and given to you on your 18th birthday, no sooner." I stared at the envelope, my mind struggling to connect it to my reality. My reality was a bus pass and $74 in cash. My reality did not include mysterious, wax-sealed letters. "Who is it from?" "Your grandfather, Arthur Vance." The name hit me like a stone skipped across a still pond. Arthur Vance, my mother's father. He was a ghost, a myth in our fractured family story. The official narrative, the one I'd pieced together from scraps of overheard conversations and the cold, clinical language of state documents, was that he was a recluse. An eccentric who had cut off contact with his daughter, my mother, long before I was born. After my parents died in the car accident when I was 8, there was no family to take me. He was alive then, somewhere, but he never came. He never called. He just wasn't there. The resentment was a familiar, bitter taste in my mouth. "I don't want anything from him," I said, my hand recoiling from the envelope as if it were hot. "Leo, please," Ms. Albright urged, pushing it into my hands. "Just take it. The state appointed a probate lawyer to handle his estate. He passed away about 5 years ago. This is a legal matter now. You're his only heir." The word heir sounded ridiculous. Heirs were for people with castles and fortunes, not kids aging out of the system with nothing but a duffel bag. Heir to what? A box of his weird books? She looked uncomfortable. "It's more than that. He owned property, land, a farm, I think, out in the western part of the state. And the will mentions, well, it's strange. It mentions a vault." The bus driver honked, an impatient blast that shattered the strange bubble we were in. "I have to go, Leo. The lawyer's name and number are in there. Mr. Davies. He's expecting your call." She gave my shoulder a final, firm squeeze. "Be safe, and call me. Don't be a stranger." Then she was gone, hurrying back toward the red brick monolith of Northgate, leaving me on the curb with the rumbling bus, the heavy duffel bag, and an envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I climbed onto the bus, the envelope clutched in my hand, and didn't look back. I found a seat at the very back, the vinyl cracked and cold, and stared out the window as the familiar gray streets of the city began to slide by. An inheritance, a farm, a vault. It felt like a joke, a cruel, cosmic prank designed to give me a flicker of hope before extinguishing it completely. My grandfather hadn't wanted me when he was alive, so why would he leave me anything now that he was dead? It had to be a mistake, or worse, a burden. A property probably drowning in debt, a final anchor to pull me under. I slit the envelope open with my thumbnail. Inside was a single folded sheet of heavy cream-colored paper and a business card. The card was simple: Robert Davies, attorney at law. The letter was from him. It was short and to the point. It confirmed what Ms. Albright had said. I was the sole beneficiary of the estate of Arthur Vance. The estate consisted of a 40-acre property with a farmhouse and several outbuildings, located in a place called Stillwater Creek. It also confirmed the liabilities: nearly 6 years of unpaid property taxes, amounting to a figure that made my stomach clench. And then there was the final paragraph. Furthermore, a standing offer for the property has been made by a corporate entity, Viridian Growth Solutions, which would be sufficient to clear all debts and provide you with a significant net profit. I have been instructed by the court to advise you of this offer and to facilitate the sale should you choose to accept. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss your options. Significant net profit. The words swam in front of my eyes. For a boy who counted his net worth in loose change, it was an impossible concept. Sell the land of the man who abandoned me and walk away with a future. It was the easiest decision in the world. It had to be. But as the bus pulled onto the highway, leaving the city skyline to shrink in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake a different feeling. A tiny, nagging question that burrowed into the numbness. A vault. What was in the vault? I spent 2 nights in a cheap motel that smelled of pine cleaner and desperation, the $74 dwindling with alarming speed. I ate vending machine crackers and stared at the water-stained ceiling, the lawyer's letter on the nightstand beside me. The offer from Viridian Growth Solutions felt like a lifeline. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I could take the money, get an apartment, go to community college, and build a normal life from scratch. It was everything I was supposed to want. It was the sensible choice. But my grandfather's silence had been a defining feature of my entire life. It was the empty chair at every holiday I'd spent in a foster home, the unanswered question behind my mother's tired eyes in the few photos I had of her. Now he was speaking from beyond the grave, and his first words were about a vault. It felt like the punchline to a story I'd never been told. On the third morning, with my cash down to a single $10 bill, I called Mr. Davies. His voice was exactly as I'd imagined from his letter, dry, precise, and devoid of discernible emotion. It was the voice of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. "Mr. Vance, I'm glad you called. I trust you've had time to consider the offer." "I have some questions," I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. "Of course. I have the file in front of me." I could hear the rustle of papers. "The property is 40 acres, as stated. Title is clear, aside from the tax lien. The offer from Viridian is for $150,000. After the back taxes of approximately $38,000 and my legal fees are settled, you would stand to walk away with a net sum of roughly $105,000. $105,000. I mouthed the words silently. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. It was a new life. It was safety. "Why do they want it?" I asked. "It's a derelict farm, right?" There was a pause. Viridian Growth Solutions is a large-scale agricultural development firm. They've been acquiring parcels of land in that region for several years. Your grandfather's property is one of the last independent holdings in the area. They wanted to complete a larger tract for a new research and distribution hub. He said it all so matter-of-factly, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. They were swallowing up the whole area. My grandfather, the recluse, the man who wanted nothing to do with anyone, had been the last holdout. "And he never sold?" "He was adamant," Mr. Davies said, and for the first time I detected a flicker of something other than professional detachment in his voice. Maybe respect, maybe just faint surprise. They made him several offers over the years, increasing each time. He refused them all without explanation. I thought about the man who hadn't bothered to claim his own grandson, yet stubbornly refused to give up a piece of dirt. It didn't make sense. None of it did. "The will," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Ms. Albright said it mentioned a vault." "Ah, yes, the vault," Mr. Davies said, his tone shifting back to dry professionalism. "Clause 4B of the last will and testament of Arthur Vance. It's a rather eccentric provision. It states that a sealed vault, located within the main barn, is to be considered part of the inheritance. It makes no mention of the contents, only that the means to open it, a key, is where it has always been, waiting for a hand that knows how to build, not just to take." I wrote the words down on the motel notepad. A hand that knows how to build, not just to take. It sounded like a riddle from a fantasy novel. "So, no one knows what's inside?" "Correct. Given the state of the property and your grandfather's solitary lifestyle, the court saw no reason to incur the expense of forcibly opening it. It's legally part of the property. If you sell to Viridian, they will acquire it, sealed or not. Frankly, they probably consider it a liability they'll have to demolish." The thought sent a strange protective pang through me. Demolish it. Erase it, without ever knowing. "Mr. Davies," I said, making a decision that felt both insane and absolutely necessary. "I don't want to sell. Not yet." There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him blinking, recalibrating. "Mr. Vance, Leo, I must advise you this is unwise. The tax lien is substantial. The county will seize the property and auction it off within 90 days if the debt is not settled. You have no income, no resources. The offer from Viridian is your only viable path. It is a gift. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. But I need to see it first. I need to go there. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined him pinching the bridge of his nose, contemplating the foolishness of youth. Very well, he said finally, his voice tight with resignation. It is your right. The property is legally yours to access. I will courier a packet to you with a copy of the deed, the will, and a map. But Leo, be realistic. A weekend of romanticizing a pastoral fantasy will not change the facts. The debt is real. The deadline is real. Viridian's offer is the only real solution on the table. I'll be in touch, I said, and hung up before he could argue further. I felt a surge of something wild and unfamiliar. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was agency. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being told where to go or what to do. I was choosing. And I was choosing to walk toward the mystery, not away from it. The next day, a courier delivered the packet from Mr. Davies. It contained a dizzying stack of legal documents, but the two things that mattered were a crisp copy of a property map and a bus ticket. He had, at least, fronted me the fare. The destination printed on the ticket read, Stillwater Creek. I looked at the name, then at the map. It was a tiny dot on a network of winding country roads, hours away from anything I recognized as civilization. It was the middle of nowhere. It was the last place on earth I ever expected to go. But it was the only place I had. The bus ride was a journey across a border I never knew existed. For 3 hours, the landscape outside my window transformed. The dense, vertical geometry of the city, concrete and steel, graffiti and grime, slowly dissolved. It gave way to the sprawling, horizontal world of suburbs, then exurbs, and finally to something else entirely. The highways narrowed into 2-lane roads that curved and dipped with the contours of the land. The buildings grew farther apart, their sharp edges replaced by sagging rooflines and peeling paint. The world turned from gray to green and gold. Fields of harvested corn stretched to the horizon, the cut stalks like a pale, bristly carpet. Patches of forest blazed with the fierce, dying colors of autumn. It was beautiful, but it was an alien kind of beauty. It was quiet, so quiet that the rumble of the bus engine felt like a violation. I was the only person who stayed on for the final leg of the journey. The driver, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes, kept glancing at me in the rear-view mirror. When the bus finally rolled to a stop in front of a single, sad-looking storefront with a sign that read, Stillwater Creek General Store, he turned in his seat. "This is it, son. End of the line." I grabbed my duffel bag and stood in the aisle. "Is there a taxi? A motel?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're looking at the taxi stand, the motel, and the town hall, all in one. Marge, who runs the store, can call her nephew to give you a ride if you need one. Where are you headed?" "The old Vance place," I said. The driver's expression changed. The friendly curiosity hardened into something more cautious, more guarded. "Arthur's place? Nobody's been out there in years, not since he passed." He looked me up and down, my city clothes and my single bag. "You family?" "His grandson," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a borrowed identity. He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding, or maybe pity, in his eyes. "I see. Well, good luck to you then." I stepped off the bus and into the silence. It was profound. The air smelled of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else, something clean and wild. The general store looked like it had been there for 100 years. A rusty gas pump stood out front like a sentinel. Across the street, a small post office and a boarded-up diner completed the town square. That was it. That was Stillwater Creek. I pushed open the door to the general store. A little bell chimed. The inside was a warm, cluttered cave filled with the scent of coffee, sawdust, and old paper. Shelves were packed with everything from canned beans and motor oil to fishing lures and wool socks. Behind the counter stood a woman with a cloud of white hair and a no-nonsense expression. This had to be Marge. She watched me approach, her eyes sharp. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am," I said, setting my bag down. "The bus driver said you might be able to help me get a ride." "Depends where you're going." "The Vance property." Like the bus driver, her face closed off. The warmth in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "Arthur's place," she said, her voice flat. "What business you got out there?" "I'm his grandson, Leo. I inherited it." She stared at me for a long moment, her gaze so intense it felt like she was reading the last 10 years of my life. Then her expression softened, just a fraction. A little of the hardness melted away, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You've got his eyes." She picked up an old rotary phone from the counter and spun the dial. "Earl," she said into the receiver, "I need you to come down to the store. Got a young man here needs a ride out to the old Vance farm." "Yeah, that's what I said." "He's family." She hung up and looked at me. "Earl will be here in 10. He's my nephew. Drives a pickup. He'll take you." She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug without asking if I wanted any and pushed it across the counter. On the house. I wrapped my cold hands around it. The warmth was a small comfort in a world that felt increasingly unreal. "People here didn't like him much, did they?" I asked quietly. Marge let out a long sigh, leaning against the counter. "It's not that we didn't like him, Leo. It's that we didn't know him. When he first bought that place 30 years ago, he and his wife were friendly enough. Then she passed, and your mother left for the city, and Arthur just closed himself off. He'd come in for supplies once a month, pay in cash, say 5 words, and leave. He was a ghost long before he died. People around here, they value community. When someone deliberately stands apart from it, it's hard not to take it personally." A dusty pickup truck rattled to a stop outside. A man in his 40s with a kind, tired face got out. Earl. "That's your ride," Marge said. She put a hand on my arm before I could leave. "Listen to me. That place has been sitting empty for 5 years. It's probably a wreck. Whatever you're looking for out there, just be careful." The ride with Earl was mostly silent. He pointed out landmarks, Miller's Ridge, the old sawmill, the spot where a barn burned down last spring, but he didn't ask any questions. The paved road turned to gravel, and the gravel road turned to a dirt track that was little more than 2 ruts in the earth. The trees pressed in close, their branches scraping against the sides of the truck. After about 15 minutes, he slowed the truck and pointed through the windshield. "There she is." My first sight of my inheritance was a punch to the gut. The truck had stopped at a rusted metal gate hanging crookedly on one hinge. Beyond it, a long, overgrown driveway led to a scene of profound decay. The farmhouse was a skeleton. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. Windows were boarded up, or stared out like vacant eyes. The paint had been scoured away by years of weather, leaving the wood a ghostly silver gray. To the side, a massive barn listed slightly to the left, its great doors shut tight. Everything was being slowly consumed by nature. Weeds choked the yard. Vines climbed the walls of the house. It wasn't abandoned. It was being digested. Earl looked over at me, his expression full of sympathy. "You want me to wait? Drive you back to Marge's?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. This was it. This was the pastoral fantasy Mr. Davies had warned me about. It was a nightmare. "I'll stay," I managed to say. He nodded, understanding. "All right. Marge's number is on the coffee cup. You get into any trouble, you call. There's a signal most days if you stand on the porch." He helped me get my bag out of the truck bed, then climbed back into the cab. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned out the window. "Your granddad was a strange man," he said, "but he wasn't a bad one. Don't let anyone tell you different." And with a final compassionate look, he put the truck in reverse and drove away, leaving me alone at the gate of my ruined kingdom. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the rustle of the wind through the tall, dead grass. I was standing on the edge of my past and my future, and all I could see was decay. For a long time, I just stood there, outside the gate, the weight of the place pressing down on me. It was worse than I had imagined. Mr. Davies had called it derelict. That was a lawyer's word. This was a grave, a monument to neglect. Finally, I pushed the creaking gate open and walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel that was barely visible beneath the weeds. The air was thick with the smell of rot and rain. I went to the house first. The porch steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one before putting my full trust in it. The front door was locked, but the wood around the knob was so soft and rotted that I was able to pry it open with my shoulder. It gave way with a splintering crack and a puff of dust that smelled like dead mice and forgotten time. The inside was a landscape of dust and shadows. Moonlight, filtered through the grimy windows, cut sharp angles across the rooms. Most of the furniture was gone, likely sold off or taken long ago. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the living room, facing a cold stone fireplace. Dust motes danced in the beams of light like tiny ghosts. In the kitchen, a layer of grime covered every surface. A calendar on the wall was still turned to May 6 years ago. It was a time capsule of abandonment. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence. This was where my mother had grown up. This was where my grandfather had walled himself away from the world. There was no sign of life here, no warmth, just a profound and hollow emptiness. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Mr. Davies was right. This was a fool's errand. The smart move was to get back to town, call him, and sign the papers. Take the money and run. Never look back. But I couldn't leave, not yet. There was still the barn and the vault. I left the house and walked across the overgrown yard to the barn. It was even bigger up close, a huge, dark structure that loomed against the twilight sky. The main doors were massive, made of thick, weathered planks, and held shut by a heavy wooden beam. It took all my strength, straining until my muscles screamed, to lift the beam out of its brackets. With a groan of protest from the rusted hinges, one of the doors swung inward into the darkness. The smell that rolled out was different from the house. It was the rich, earthy scent of hay and dust and old wood, and something else, a faint metallic tang, like cold steel. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous path through the cavernous space. The barn was immense. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, crisscrossed with massive beams. Old, rusted farm equipment sat under thick shrouds of cobwebs. Stalls for animals that hadn't been there for decades lined one wall. And then I saw it. At the far end of the barn, set into the foundation wall, was the vault. It was even more jarring in person than it had sounded in my imagination. It was a thick, gray, industrial steel door, the kind you'd see on a bank or a bunker. It had no handle, only a large, circular combination lock and a single, heavy-duty keyhole. It was utterly out of place in the rustic, decaying barn. It was a secret, planted in the heart of the ruin. My grandfather's riddle echoed in my head. The key is where it has always been, waiting for a hand that knows how to build, not just to take. I swept the flashlight beam around the barn, my heart pounding. Where would he hide a key? I searched for hours. I ran my hands along the wooden beams, kicked through old piles of hay, peered into dusty feed bins. Nothing. It was hopeless. He could have hidden it anywhere. Defeated, I sank down onto an old hay bale, the dust puffing up around me. I was an idiot. A broke, homeless idiot, sitting in a collapsing barn in the middle of nowhere, chasing a ghost story. My eyes fell on a workbench in the corner, cluttered with old tools. Rusted saws, hammers, jars of screws and nails. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I walked over, running my hand over the dusty surface. This was a place of work, a place where things were made, built. My fingers brushed against something under a pile of oily rags. A small, wooden box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, hand-carved model of the farmhouse. It was exquisitely detailed, a perfect miniature of the house as it must have been in its prime, with a strong roof and clean windows. It was beautiful, a work of love, a hand that knows how to build. My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the tiny model. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over. On the bottom, a tiny wooden latch. I slid it open. The base of the model came away, and there, tucked into a small, hollowed-out space, was a single, heavy, ornate iron key. It was old and intricate, unlike any key I had ever seen. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. It was a note, written in the same elegant script as the address on the envelope. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have my eyes, and perhaps my heart. The combination is your mother's birthday, the day my world began again. Use it well. Arthur." My mother's birthday. I knew it from my file. August 14th, 68. August 14th. I stumbled back to the vault door, my flashlight beam trembling. The key felt cold and heavy in my hand. The riddle wasn't about a physical place. It was about a way of seeing the world. The key wasn't just lying around for anyone to find. It was hidden inside an act of creation, an act of building. I stood before the vault door, my mind reeling. My grandfather wasn't just a recluse. He was a puzzle maker, a storyteller. And this was the climax of his story. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I took a deep breath and began to turn the heavy dial of the combination lock. 8 to the right, 14 to the left, 68 to the right. The tumblers fell into place with a series of loud, satisfying clicks that echoed in the vast, silent barn. I turned the key. There was a heavy chunk, and the massive steel door swung inward an inch with a hiss of compressed air. The secret was open. The air that flowed out of the vault was cool, dry, and clean. It smelled of paper and earth and time, but not of decay. It was the scent of preservation. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the absolute darkness. It wasn't a vault in the way a bank has a vault. There were no stacks of cash, no bars of gold. It was a library, a laboratory, an archive. One entire wall was lined with industrial metal shelves, from floor to ceiling, packed with hundreds of identical, neatly labeled binders. Another wall held rows upon rows of small, sealed glass jars filled with seeds of every shape and color. In the center of the room stood a large drafting table, a high-backed stool tucked beneath it. On the table, a set of architectural plans was unrolled, held down at the corners by smooth river stones. The far wall was covered in corkboard, which was itself covered in a complex web of diagrams, chemical formulas, soil composition charts, and handwritten notes, all connected by a dizzying network of red and black string. It was the life's work of a brilliant, obsessive mind. It was breathtaking. And in the very center of the floor, placed with deliberate care, was a simple wooden chest. I knelt and lifted the lid. Inside, there was no treasure. There was only a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a simple piece of twine. The top envelope was addressed to me. Leo. My name, in that familiar, elegant hand. My hands trembled as I untied the twine and opened the first letter. The paper was thick, the ink a deep, permanent black. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means I am gone. It means the state has finally seen fit to release you into the world. And it means you found your way here, to the heart of my life's only truly important work. I hope, with all my heart, that you found the key not through greed, but through curiosity. I hid it not to be clever, but to set a condition. This legacy is for a builder, not a seller. I had to stop and take a breath. His voice, in my head, was not the voice of the cold, distant figure I had imagined. It was warm, sad, and deeply intelligent. I owe you an explanation. I owe you more than that. I owe you a grandfather, and I am sorry, more sorry than these words can ever convey, that I could not be one. The story you were told, the story of the man who abandoned his family, is not the truth. It is the story I was forced to build around myself, a fortress of solitude to protect what is in this room. Your mother, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, understood. It was the hardest choice of her life, and of mine. 30 years ago, I was a professor of agronomy and botany at a major university. I was working on something revolutionary, a series of genetic modifications achieved through natural crossbreeding and selection, not corporate chemistry, that could create what I called sovereign seeds. Seeds that were immune to common blights, that thrived in poor soil, that required a fraction of the water, and most importantly, that produced crops that were sterile-free, meaning a farmer could save their own seeds for the next season instead of being forced to buy new ones every year from a large corporation. It was a way to give power back to the land and to the people who worked it. A major agrochemical corporation, a company called Viridian, got wind of my research. At the time, they were just a hungry upstart, but they were ruthless. They tried to buy my research. When I refused, they tried to steal it. They funded a rival academic to discredit my work. They threatened my tenure. They made it clear they would stop at nothing to either own my discoveries or bury them. They understood that what I was doing wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a threat to their entire business model, which is based on dependency, on selling farmers patented seeds and the pesticides and fertilizers required to make them grow. I knew I couldn't fight them in that arena. They had armies of lawyers and billions of dollars, so I disappeared. I took my savings, bought this remote piece of land, and moved my research here. I became a recluse, a hermit. It was a performance, a character I had to play to become invisible. I cut ties with the academic world. I let my reputation wither. When your mother wanted to leave for the city to build her own life, I encouraged her. It was safer for her to be away from me. Our contact was sparse, secret. Phone calls from payphones, letters with no return address. It broke both our hearts, but we both knew it was necessary. Then you were born, and you were the light of her life and the secret joy of mine. She would send me pictures. I have them all. You as a baby, you on your first day of school. They are in the chest at the bottom. But my paranoia grew. Viridian had become a global behemoth, and I knew they hadn't forgotten about me. I feared that any connection to me, no matter how tenuous, could put you and your mother in danger. So I pulled away even further. It was the greatest regret of my life. When your parents died, the state contacted me. I was listed as next of kin. To claim you would have been to bring you into my world, to put you on Viridian's radar, to expose you to the one danger I had spent my life trying to escape. So I did the most difficult thing I have ever done. I refused. I let the state take you, knowing you would be safe in the anonymity of the system. I told myself it was to protect you. I told myself you were better off without a strange, broken old man in a collapsing farmhouse. I don't know if I was right. I pray to God you can forgive me. I had to put the letter down. The air in the vault felt thick, heavy. I couldn't breathe. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent. I wasn't crying for the boy who was abandoned. I was crying for the man who had to do the abandoning. I was crying for the grandfather I never knew, a man of quiet, heroic sacrifice. The anger and resentment I had carried for a decade dissolved, leaving behind an aching, cavernous grief. He didn't abandon me. He protected me. The entire story of my life had just been rewritten. The foundation of my identity, the story of being the unwanted kid, was a lie. A noble lie. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. Everything I know is in this room, Leo. My research, my seeds, my plans. The plans on the table are not just for a farm. They are for a self-sufficient ecosystem, a geothermal greenhouse, a water reclamation system, a way to turn this ruined land into a living, breathing testament to what agriculture could be. Viridian wants this land because they know it was mine. They don't know what's here, but they want to bulldoze it to be sure my ghost can never haunt them. Their offer is not a kindness. It's an act of erasure. I am leaving you with a choice. It is, perhaps, an unfair one. You can take their money. I would not blame you. God knows you deserve an easy life after the one you've had. Buy a house, get an education, be happy. Forget this place, and forget the old man who failed you. Or you can stay. You can accept this inheritance, not of land, but of purpose. You can try to build what I could only plan. It will be hard. They will fight you, but you will not be alone. Everything you need to know is here. The choice, my dear boy, is yours. All my love, Arthur. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I looked around the vault, at the shelves of knowledge, the jars of life, the intricate plans. It wasn't a tomb, it was a seed that had been waiting, dormant, for a decade, waiting for me. The weight of his choice, his sacrifice, settled on my shoulders. It was a crushing, terrifying weight. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat on the floor of the vault, the single beam of my phone's flashlight, creating a small island of light in the profound darkness. And I read. I read every letter my grandfather had left for me. There were 10 of them, each one detailing a different part of his life and his work. He wrote about my grandmother, about their dream of building this farm together before she got sick. He wrote about my mother, her fiery spirit, and her artistic talent. He wrote about the science, explaining the principles of his sovereign seeds in language that was simple, passionate, and clear. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a teacher. With every page, the ghost of Arthur Vance became a man, a brilliant, flawed, lonely, and loving man. The grief I felt was immense, a physical ache in my chest. Grief for the years we'd lost. Grief for the conversations we'd never have. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root. A fierce, protective anger. Not at him, but at the faceless entity that had stolen him from me. Viridian Growth Solutions. The friendly-sounding corporation from Mr. Davies' letter was a villain in my family's story. They hadn't just wanted to buy land. They had wanted to destroy a man, to silence an idea that threatened their power. And now they were trying to finish the job, to bulldoze his legacy and pay me to help them do it. The $105,000 that had seemed like a fortune, a ticket to freedom, now felt like blood money. It was the price of my grandfather's erasure. By dawn, the flashlight on my phone had died, and the gray morning light was filtering into the barn. I was emotionally and physically exhausted. My body felt heavy, my mind raw. The choice he had laid before me felt impossible. On one hand, a life of security, a clean break, the easy road. On the other, a ruined farm, a mountain of debt, a fight against a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and the crushing weight of a dead man's dream. I stumbled out of the barn and into the cold morning air. The property looked different now. It was still a wreck, still a scene of decay, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with his presence. I could almost see him, a tall, thoughtful man, walking these fields, planning, dreaming, sacrificing. I walked to the house and sat on the sagging porch steps, the same steps he must have sat on 1,000 times. I thought about my life at Northgate, the endless beige corridors, the drone of the television in the common room, the feeling of being a temporary object in a temporary place. I had never had a home, not a real one. I had never had a purpose. I was a ship without a rudder, waiting to be pushed in one direction or another by the currents of the system. Selling was the sensible thing to do. It was what any rational person would advise. Ms. Albright would tell me to take the money. Mr. Davies had already told me to take the money. It was the escape I thought I wanted. But was it? Escaping to what? Another anonymous apartment? Another life of feeling disconnected? Here, on this broken piece of land, I felt a connection. It was terrifying and overwhelming, but it was real. It was a story, my story. And I was, for the first time, in a position to write the next chapter myself. I pulled out Marge's coffee cup, the number for the general store scrawled on the side. My hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from cold or fear. It was from resolve. This is the part of the story where everything hinges on a single moment. It's a quiet moment, but it's the one that defines everything that comes after. Have you ever had a moment like that? A crossroads where you had to choose between the easy path and the right one, even when the right one looked impossible. If you have, I think you know the feeling that was in my gut right then. It's a mix of terror and clarity. If you've been through something like that, or if you're facing a choice like that right now, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here, it's for people who understand that the hardest roads often lead to the most beautiful places. So if this is hitting home, drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one, because your story matters. Now, let's get back to that porch. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the phone number. The choice wasn't just about money versus purpose. It was about who I was going to be. Was I going to be the scared kid from the system, always taking the safest option, always looking for an exit? Or was I going to be Arthur Vance's grandson, a builder, a fighter, a hand that knows how to build, not just to take? I cried. I cried for the little boy who waited for a grandfather who never came. I cried for the mother I barely remembered. I cried for the brilliant, lonely man who died here, surrounded by his secrets. It was a storm of grief I had been holding back for a decade, and when it was over, I felt scoured clean, empty. And in that emptiness, there was room for a decision. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked to the one spot on the porch where Earl had said I might get a signal. I held up my phone. 1 bar. It was enough. I didn't call Marge. I called the number on the business card. The phone rang twice before Mr. Davies answered, his voice as crisp and dry as ever. "Davies? It's Leo Vance." There was a brief pause. "Leo, have you come to your senses? Are you ready to sign the acceptance of offer?" "No," I said, and my voice was steady. It was stronger than I had ever heard it. "I'm calling to tell you I'm rejecting Viridian's offer. I'm not selling." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I thought the call might have dropped. I could picture him in his leather chair, his perfectly ordered desk, his world of neat files and predictable outcomes, completely thrown by this illogical, emotional decision from the orphan kid. "Leo," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Let me be perfectly clear. You have no money. You have a tax debt that will lead to foreclosure in less than 3 months. The property is uninhabitable. This is not a game. Rejecting this offer is financial suicide." "I know what it looks like," I said, my eyes fixed on the sagging roof of the barn. "But this place, it's more than just land and a tax lien. It's my home." The word felt foreign and powerful on my tongue. "I'm staying. I'm going to find a way to pay the taxes. I'm going to fix it up." He let out a sigh that was a mixture of exasperation and disbelief. "With what? Good intentions don't pay the county treasurer, son." "I'll figure it out," I said. "My grandfather, he left me a plan." It was the truest thing I had ever said. He hadn't left me money. He had left me a blueprint. "I see," Mr. Davies said, and the temperature of his voice dropped another 20 degrees. "Well, you are 18. You are free to make your own disastrous decisions. I will inform Viridian's counsel that you are rejecting their offer. Do not expect another one, and do not call me when the foreclosure notice is posted on your door." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, a cold wave of panic washing over me. What had I just done? I had thrown away a fortune. I had alienated the only professional contact I had. I was alone on a ruined farm with an impossible task, and a ticking clock. But as the panic subsided, it was replaced by that same strange, solid feeling. Purpose. I looked from the broken-down house to the listing barn. It was a wreck. It was my wreck. It was my home. I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to do something, anything, to make my decision feel real. I started with the house. I found a broom in a back closet and swept out a decade of dust and dead leaves. I tore the rotten boards off the windows, letting the clean autumn light pour in for the first time in years. The work was hard and dirty, but every bit of progress, no matter how small, felt like a victory. It felt like I was pushing back against the decay. That evening, exhausted and covered in grime, I went back to the vault. I opened one of the binders at random. It was a detailed seasonal planting schedule, complete with diagrams for crop rotation and companion planting. I opened another. It was a step-by-step guide to building a cold frame for seedlings using salvaged materials. Another contained his research on soil remediation, methods for revitalizing depleted earth using specific cover crops. It was all there, a complete education in self-sufficiency, a roadmap out of the ruin. I found the chest with his personal effects. At the bottom, just as his letter had promised, was a stack of photos. Me as a baby, wrapped in a blanket. Me as a toddler with chocolate on my face. Me on a tricycle. My mother had sent them to him. He had kept every single one. He had watched me grow up from a distance, a silent, loving ghost in the background of my life. Holding those photos, I made a silent promise to him, to the man in the pictures. I will not let this die. I will build it. The next morning I took stock. I had $9, a duffel bag of clothes, a broken-down farm, a vault full of secrets, and a 90-day deadline. It was time to get to work. The first week was a lesson in humility. I quickly realized that will and purpose were not enough to fix a sagging roof or plow a field. The scale of the task was crushing. Every small victory was followed by a fresh wave of overwhelming problems. The farmhouse plumbing was shot. The electricity was off. The well pump was seized. I was sleeping on the floor in my sleeping bag, eating cold canned beans from the stash I'd bought at Marge's with my last few dollars, and washing in a bucket of cold water. More than once, I collapsed onto my sleeping bag at night, aching in every muscle, and thought, Davies was right. I'm an idiot. But every morning, I would go to the vault. It became my sanctuary, my classroom. I would read my grandfather's binders by the light of a cheap battery-powered lantern I'd bought. His voice, clear and methodical on the page, was my only guide. Start small, one entry read. Don't try to conquer the whole 40 acres at once. Choose one small plot. The one with the best morning sun. That is your beginning. Heal that one piece of earth first. Following his instructions, I chose a half-acre plot behind the house. The ground was hard and choked with weeds. I found an old rusted spade in the barn, and I began to dig. The work was brutal. My hands, soft from a life lived indoors, were blistered and raw by the end of the first day. But I kept going. I would dig until my back screamed, then go into the vault and read. I learned about the layers of soil, about the importance of aeration, about the cover crops he recommended to fix nitrogen back into the depleted earth. He had jars of clover and vetch seeds stored for this exact purpose. A week into this punishing routine, a dusty pickup truck I didn't recognize rumbled up the driveway. An old man with a deeply lined face and hands as gnarled as oak roots got out. He watched me for a moment as I struggled to turn over the hard soil. "You're doing that all wrong," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't say it with malice, just as a statement of fact. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of a dirty hand. "It's the only way I know how." He walked over, his eyes scanning the plot of land, then my blistered hands. "You're Arthur's boy, aren't you?" I nodded. "His grandson, Leo." He grunted. "Name's Cal. Lived down the road for 50 years. Knew your granddad, before he went strange, anyway." He kicked at a clump of dirt. "This land's been fallow for 20 years. You can't just turn it with a spade. You'll kill yourself before you get an acre done." He looked over at the barn, then back at me. "Arthur had an old rototiller in there, a walking tractor. Haven't seen it in ages, but I bet it's still there." We spent the next hour in the barn, and with Cal's guidance, we found it under a dusty tarp. It was an ancient, beastly-looking machine. Cal, it turned out, was a mechanical wizard. He tinkered with the engine, cleaned the carburetor with a bit of gasoline, and after 20 minutes of coaxing, the machine sputtered to life with a deafening roar and a cloud of blue smoke. He showed me how to use it, how to lean into it and let the machine do the work. In one afternoon, I accomplished what would have taken me a month by hand. As the sun began to set, Cal watched me survey the perfectly tilled soil. "Why are you doing this, boy?" he asked quietly. "There's an easy payout on this land. Everyone knows it." "My grandfather didn't want it sold," I said. "He left instructions." Cal nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "He was always working on something out here, secretive. People thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. Or maybe he was just ahead of his time." He turned to leave. "You need help with that engine again, you come find me. And you're gonna need more than canned beans if you're gonna do this kind of work." It was the first crack of light, the first sign that I wasn't entirely alone. A few days later, the other shoe dropped. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the gate. A man in a crisp, expensive suit got out. He didn't come through the gate. He just stood there, radiating an aura of impatient authority. He was holding a file. He was from Viridian. "Leo Vance?" he called out. I walked down the driveway to meet him, my heart pounding. He was the physical embodiment of the enemy. "I'm Mark Theron, counsel for Viridian Growth Solutions," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I was sorry to hear you rejected our very generous offer. I came out personally to ask you to reconsider." "It wasn't a generous offer," I said, surprised at my own boldness. "It was an insult." His smile tightened. "It's a fair market price for a derelict property with a massive tax lien. Let's be practical. You're a kid with no resources. In less than 80 days, the county is going to take this land. You'll walk away with nothing. We're offering you $105,000, a new life." "This is my new life," I said, gesturing back at the tilled field. He laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Playing farmer? This isn't a game. We want this land. We have plans for it, big plans. Don't be the sentimental fool who stands in the way of progress." The threat was veiled, but it was there. "Your grandfather was a fool," he continued, his voice turning colder. "He stood in the way of progress for years, hoarding this land out of spite. Don't make the same mistake." The anger that had been simmering in me for days boiled over. "My grandfather was a brilliant man who you and your company tried to destroy, and you're not getting this land. Not now, not ever." His face went blank, the fake smile vanishing completely. "We'll see about that," he said. He got back in his SUV and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The encounter left me shaken. This wasn't just a legal battle over property anymore. It was personal. They knew who I was. They knew who he was. That night, I called Mr. Davies. "They came here," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "A lawyer from Viridian. He threatened me." To my surprise, Davies didn't say, "I told you so." He was silent for a moment. What did he say exactly? I recounted the conversation. When I was done, Davies let out a long breath. "Theron, I know him. He's their bulldog." He paused. "Leo, I advised you to sell because it was the logical choice. But threatening a kid on his own property, that's not business. That's something else." I heard a new sound in his voice. The dry, detached professional was gone. In his place was an angry lawyer. "Listen to me," he said, his voice sharp and focused. "They're trying to intimidate you because a legal fight would be a nuisance for them. It means they see you as a threat, however small. That's good. It means we have leverage. I know a woman in your county. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. She's a land use attorney. She's young, but she's a shark, and she hates companies like Viridian. I'll make a call. She might take your case pro bono for the principle of it." I was stunned. "You'd do that? I thought you were done with me." "My job is to represent my client's interests," he said gruffly. "And right now, it is in your interest not to get steamrolled by a corporate predator. Don't talk to them again. Call Sarah Jenkins. And Leo, stay safe." He hung up. I stood there in the dark, a sliver of hope cutting through the fear. I wasn't just a kid on a farm anymore. I was a client, and I had a bulldog of my own on the way. The fight was just beginning. Meeting Sarah Jenkins was like meeting a force of nature. She drove up in a battered Jeep, wearing hiking boots and a determined expression. She had a sharp, analytical mind and a palpable disdain for bullies. She walked the property with me, listened to my entire story without interruption, and read a copy of my grandfather's first letter in thoughtful silence. When she was done, she looked at the vault, then at me. "Your grandfather was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers," she said. "This isn't just about a piece of land. It's about intellectual property. It's about a legacy. And Viridian knows it. They're not just trying to buy a farm, they're trying to bury a secret." She laid out the strategy with bracing clarity. "First, we deal with the tax lien. We can petition the county for a hardship extension based on your circumstances and file a formal plan for making the property productive. That will buy us time. Second, we go on the offensive. We file an injunction against Viridian for harassment. Theron showing up at your gate was a mistake on their part. It shows intent to intimidate. It makes them look bad." For the first time, I felt like I had a shield. Sarah's confidence was infectious. She saw the law not as a set of rigid rules, but as a toolbox, a set of levers to be pulled. The next few months were a whirlwind. Sarah was true to her word. She filed the motions, and her presence alone seemed to put a stop to Viridian's more overt intimidation tactics. The sleek black SUV didn't return. Instead, the fight moved into the sterile realm of legal correspondence. Certified letters arrived, filled with dense jargon and veiled threats. But Sarah handled them all, translating them for me and firing back with her own meticulously crafted responses. With the immediate legal threat held at bay, I poured all my energy into the farm. I followed my grandfather's plans to the letter. I planted the cover crops Cal had helped me till the soil for. I spent my days clearing brush, repairing fences, and working on the farmhouse. Cal became a quiet fixture in my life. He'd show up every few days with an old tool he'd found in his barn, or a piece of advice on how to fix something. He never asked for anything in return. Through him, I started to meet other people. Marge from the general store began letting me run a tab for groceries. Earl, her nephew, helped me haul away a truckload of debris from the yard. People were wary at first, their memories of the strange, silent Arthur Vance coloring their perception of me. But as the weeks turned into months and they saw me working from sunup to sundown, they saw something else. They saw a kid trying. The cover crops grew, a carpet of vibrant green against the brown earth. As my grandfather's notes had predicted, they were revitalizing the soil. I could feel the difference under my boots. The land felt softer, more alive. Winter arrived, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of snow. The world went quiet. It was a time for planning. I spent the long, cold nights in the vault, which was naturally insulated and warmer than the drafty farmhouse. I studied my grandfather's architectural plans. The centerpiece of his vision was a large geothermal greenhouse that could allow for year-round cultivation. The plans were brilliant, but they required materials and skills I didn't have. The reality of my financial situation was a constant, gnawing anxiety. The extension on the taxes was temporary. I needed to make the farm generate income, and soon. I started small. Using salvaged windows from the house and lumber from a collapsed shed, I built a small cold frame against the south-facing wall of the barn, just as his binder had instructed. In late winter, I planted the first of his seeds. He had varieties of lettuce, spinach, and kale specifically bred for cold tolerance. I watched over them like a nervous parent, and to my astonishment, they sprouted. Tiny green shoots pushing up through the dark soil in the dead of winter. It felt like a miracle. It was the first tangible proof that his science, his life's work, was real. When spring arrived, I had a small but steady supply of fresh, organic greens. I loaded them into a basket and walked the 2 miles to the general store. "Marge," I said, my voice unsteady, I'd like to start paying off my tab." I placed the basket on the counter. She looked at the vibrant, healthy greens, then at me, my face smudged with dirt, my hands calloused and strong. A slow smile spread across her face. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Arthur's boy is a farmer after all." She bought the whole basket. It was enough to clear my debt and buy a few more supplies. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't even close to what I needed to pay the taxes, but it was a start. It was income I had generated with my own 2 hands from my own land. The news that the Vance boy was selling produce spread through the small community. Cal told his neighbors. Marge told her customers. People started driving up my long driveway, curious. They'd buy a bag of lettuce and end up staying for a while, looking at the work I was doing. They saw the revitalized plot of land, the neat rows of seedlings, the slow, steady progress. They started to see what I saw, not a ruin, but a resurrection. The farm was becoming more than just my project. It was becoming a part of the community, a point of interest, a symbol of stubborn resilience. The fight with Viridian was far from over. Sarah warned me that they were just regrouping, likely preparing a new, more aggressive legal strategy. But something had shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies. I had a small, growing business. I had a community starting to rally around me. And I had a vault full of sovereign seeds, waiting for their turn to be planted. The first year bled into the second. The rhythm of the seasons became the rhythm of my life. I expanded my garden, tilling another acre. I started raising chickens for eggs, using a coop design from one of my grandfather's binders. The small income from my produce and eggs was just enough to live on and to slowly chip away at the mountain of back taxes. It was a hand-to-mouth existence, but it was a life I was building myself. The farm was slowly healing, and so was I. The hollowness inside me, the part that had been shaped by a decade in the system, was being filled with the purpose of the work. I was no longer Leo Vance, the orphan. I was Leo Vance, the farmer, the grandson of Arthur Vance. I was a steward of his legacy. Viridian hadn't gone away. They had shifted their tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, they began a war of attrition. They filed frivolous complaints with the county about zoning violations. They challenged the water rights associated with the creek that ran through my property. Each complaint required a legal response from Sarah, draining time and resources. It was a strategy designed to bleed me dry, to make it impossible for me to continue. But the attacks had an unintended consequence. They solidified the community's support for me. My fight became their fight. Cal organized a workday at the farm. 24 people from Stillwater Creek showed up one Saturday. They helped me repair the barn roof. They helped me dig irrigation ditches. They helped me build a larger chicken coop. They brought food and shared stories. At the end of the day, standing on my porch and watching them leave, I was overwhelmed with a feeling I had never known before. Belonging. This place, this community, had become my home in a way I never thought possible. One of the people who showed up that day was a retired carpenter named George. He was fascinated by my grandfather's plans for the geothermal greenhouse. "This is brilliant," he said, poring over the blueprints. "Your granddad was an engineering genius. It's complex, but it's sound. I could help you build this." The greenhouse was the key. It was the way to make the farm truly viable, to escape the seasonal limitations and the constant financial pressure. But it required a significant investment in materials. That winter, Sarah called me with an idea. "There are grants for sustainable agriculture and community projects," she said. "Your farm is a perfect candidate. You're restoring derelict land, using innovative organic methods, and you have community support. We can write a proposal." We spent weeks on it. I wrote about my grandfather's vision. Sarah handled the legal and financial projections. Cal, Marge, and a dozen other community members wrote letters of support. We were asking for $50,000, enough to pay off the remaining tax debt and fund the construction of the greenhouse. It felt like a long shot, a dream. Months went by. I kept working, planting, harvesting. I tried not to think about the grant, not to get my hopes up. Then, one sunny afternoon in May, an official-looking car drove up the driveway. It wasn't a black SUV. It was a sensible sedan from the State Department of Agriculture. A woman in a practical suit got out, holding our proposal. She spent 3 hours touring the farm. I showed her the vault, the seeds, the thriving gardens, the plans for the greenhouse. I introduced her to Cal, who was helping me fix a fence. She saw not just a project, but a living, breathing community effort. A week later, the letter arrived. We got the grant. All of it. I remember sitting on the porch, holding the letter, the world going quiet around me. It wasn't just money, it was validation. It was proof that my grandfather's dream was not a fantasy. It was a viable, fundable, important idea. It was a signal that the world was starting to catch up to him. The news of the grant was the final blow to Viridian's local campaign. Their strategy of portraying me as a foolish kid standing in the way of progress fell apart. Now I was a grant-winning innovator, a poster child for the very kind of sustainable farming that was becoming increasingly popular. Their harassment campaign had backfired, turning me into a local hero. They quietly withdrew their legal challenges. They didn't concede defeat, but they retreated. They went silent. The construction of the greenhouse became a community project. George the carpenter led the charge, teaching me and a rotating crew of volunteers. We laid the foundation, ran the geothermal piping deep into the earth, and raised the structure. It was a beautiful, soaring building of glass and steel, a cathedral dedicated to life. The day we finished, the entire town seemed to show up. We had a potluck feast in the barn. Marge brought a cake that said, "Congratulations, Leo." Cal gave a short, gruff speech. "Arthur would be proud," was all he said, and it was the highest praise I could have imagined. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had helped me rebuild my life, I finally understood the true meaning of inheritance. My grandfather hadn't left me a farm. He had left me a community. He had left me a purpose. The land was just the soil where it could all take root. The vault was just the seed. The real inheritance was the chance to build something that mattered, and the discovery that I didn't have to do it alone. The years that followed were filled with work, growth, and a quiet, profound joy. The geothermal greenhouse was a game changer. It allowed for year-round production, insulating the farm from the whims of the seasons and the market. I was able to grow a diverse range of crops, many from my grandfather's unique sovereign seeds. The farm, which I officially named Arthur's Hold, became a thriving business. We supplied produce to restaurants in nearby cities, started a popular CSA program, and became a model for sustainable agriculture in the region. The story of the orphan who turned a derelict farm into a beacon of hope attracted some media attention. A few articles were written. A local news station did a segment. It was through one of these articles that I finally heard from Mr. Davies again. He sent me a short, handwritten note. "Leo," it said, "I saw the article about your farm. I am not often wrong in my professional assessments, but I am glad I was in your case. Congratulations. Yours, Robert Davies." Tucked into the note was a check for his original legal fees, which I had long since paid off. On the memo line, he had written, "A donation to a worthy cause." I never sold out. I never became a millionaire. But I built something better. I built a home. I built a community. I built a life that had meaning. The farm became more than just a place to grow food. It became a place for education. I started hosting workshops, teaching the principles my grandfather had laid out in his binders. I shared his sovereign seeds with other small farmers, creating a network of growers committed to his vision of agricultural independence. Viridian never came back, but I know they're still out there. The fight isn't over. It's a fight that's being waged in fields and boardrooms all over the world. But now, I'm not just a kid defending a piece of land. I'm part of a movement. My grandfather's legacy isn't just alive, it's growing. It's spreading, seed by seed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I go into the vault. It's no longer a secret archive. The door stands open. It's the heart of the farm, a library, and a seed bank for the whole community. I'll pull out the wooden chest and look at the photos of myself as a boy. I think about the two paths that lay before me on that day I arrived here. The easy path, and the one I chose. And I know, with a certainty that fills every part of me, that I chose right. This story isn't really about me, or even about my grandfather. It's about the choices we make. It's about what we choose to nurture and what we choose to let go. It's about the idea that the most valuable things we can inherit are not money or property, but purpose, responsibility, and a story worth continuing. Home isn't a place you are given, it's a place you build. Family isn't just about the blood you share, it's about the people who show up for you, who help you raise the roof and till the soil. And inheritance isn't what's left to you, it's what you do with what you're left with. I look at my hands now. They're not the soft, uncertain hands of the boy who left Northgate. They are calloused, strong, and stained with the dirt of my own land. They are the hands of a builder. My grandfather would be proud. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, or build a life from the ground up, I hope you'll join our community here. Hit that subscribe button, because this farm's journey is still unfolding, and there are so many more stories to tell. More importantly, I want to hear your story. What have you inherited? Not just money or things, but beliefs, responsibilities, or dreams. What have you chosen to build in your own life? Share it in the comments below. I promise I'll read them. Because every story of resilience and hope makes the world a little bit stronger. You are not alone in your struggle, and you are not alone in your strength. Thank you for being here.